welcome back to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We have quite a treat today. We get a chance to reach back into the annals of time and talk with iconic lacrosse coach, Tony Seaman. If you've been around the sport, if you've coached the sport, you've been in the booth, you've gone to a clinic, or watched television, the name Tony Seaman rings all kinds of bells for all kinds of reasons. He is one of the most iconic lacrosse coaches in the history of the sport. At 79 years old, he's gone back to high school, coaches at St. Andrews down in Florida. They won a state championship last year. We're going to talk to him about his time in the MLL, his time at Towson, John Hopkins, and a little bit about his time at CW Post. The passionate senior citizen was a really fun guy to talk to, and a real thrill to be able to take the opportunity. I think you'll enjoy this interview, and I think it's something that you should take the time to listen to, because Tony is there's very few that know as much about the game as Tony does, and I think he puts a lot of things in perspective about the sport we all love. The other thing we wanted to mention, there'll be a little bit of video as I'm talking here. We had a chance to go to Maryland, to the Michigan game this past Saturday against Maryland. Number one, best facility in the country is certainly Michigan. The University of Michigan's done a great job. JP, been putting all that together in the early days. Kevin Conroy has done a good job of getting us close to the national level with the team that he's produced. And if you get a chance to watch Maryland, wow, what a great opportunity. Why the place wasn't packed every game like it was on Saturday. Certainly have a number one team in town, and the spring football game as a part of that. But as you can see from the video here, Maryland is a very talented team, as is Michigan. And I think it'll be, if you get a chance to take a game in at the university, go take 5 seconds out and get a chance to go there and watch those guys. I want to thank all the guys from the University of Michigan that allowed us to come in and enjoy a few moments, and hopefully you'll get a chance to watch the game for the season's out. Big Ten schedule still has some available slots open, so check the website and maybe head on down to Ann Arbor. We'll be back in a second with Tony Seaman, and stay tuned.
Welcome back to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. We have, I don't know how you use the word legendary or icon, but Tony Seaman is certainly not one of the best coaches, certainly in the top 2 or 3 ever, Tony. So first of all, Tony, appreciate you coming aboard and talking with us. And you get some palm trees behind you. So we're talking to you from St. Andrews, which is Boca Raton, Florida. So thank you so much for talking with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I watch your show just about every week, so I'm always glad. It was a thrill to be on it.
I appreciate you coming aboard. I want to start. This is the twilight of both our careers, but in your case, do you appreciate it more in the fourth quarter than maybe you might have 20 years ago?
I got to admit that I've loved it every day I've done it. Even when I got fired several times, I love the job. I think it's the kids, and I think it keeps you young. And it's something that I know. There's not a lot of things I know about, but I know a little bit about this game. So that part's been unbelievable. And just the different kids that I've met over the years and the different levels, like there was nothing better ever than the pro level. That was just, there was still some coaching involved, but just the relationships, and they wanted to be there, and they got paid meager amounts of money, and had to take money out of their own pockets usually, but just that MLL, I just love that situation with Denver. That was some of the best years that I can remember in the game. But my college years were good. I never ever dreamt that I'd be back coaching high school again. That's where I started, and just I guess it was Al McGuire, the old basketball coach, who once said that his dream job would be at an orphanage. So there was no parents.
Right.
So when they asked me if I'd be involved to come back and coach here at St. Andrews, my first answer was absolutely no. But it's been a great run.
We're going to get back to Delaware Valley, but I have two questions that are unrelated to lacrosse, and this is more curiosity for me than anything else. You were involved in the campus newspaper and radio station when you were in college.
Yeah, I was.
And I asked that because I was a career journalist, and now I'm doing these, sort of half-ass television. My question is, you had some things called bites. I think they were out in Denver, sort of like little commercials where you'd have a kind of a little. How did those come about? And was that part of the idea that maybe you were a frustrated broadcaster?
No, that was all done by the Denver the Denver Broncos organization owned us. So their people, the sports information people, put those kind of things on. I had nothing to do with that.
Okay. Because there was a number of them that were pretty cool. There's still some of them on the internet, sort of infamous, if nothing else.
Yeah. My wife never liked those.
Okay. Well, let's go all the way back to, let me say this right, Callicoon, New York.
Yes. Yep. Delaware Valley Central High School.
Which, if you're not familiar with, is about what, 2.5, 3 hours south of Syracuse?
Yes, and 2 hours north of New York City.
Okay.
So right in the Catskills, right on the Delaware River.
Okay. How did lacrosse start for you?
Trying out for the baseball team at Cortland and walking down past the fields, and I stopped and went. I said, "What the name of God is this game?" And I stood there with a couple guys. We watched for about 5 minutes. I went over to the coach and said, "Can anybody try out for this? I mean, what's the story here?" And he said, "Absolutely. Everybody here is just about a beginner." And I said, "Well, what do I do equipment wise? Just go back up to the equipment room and grab a stick, and I'll introduce you to a couple guys. We'd love to have you." I said, "Where are you headed?" I said, "Baseball, but I can't hit a balloon. So this might be a better sport for me."
So you did not play lacrosse in high school?
No, never saw
Okay.
it. Didn't even know about it. Yep.
So you go to Central New York, you go to Cortland, and that would have been what, 61, 62, somewhere in there?
61.
Okay. So you have 4 years of what positions you play at Cortland?
Attack.
Okay. So what you know about lacrosse now, and a guy walks in as a freshman, we transfer a lot of football players to D midi and certainly long stick. But playing attack as a first year player, is that an undertaking that is more than difficult?
Catching and throwing was difficult at the beginning. I spent hours against the wall outside the dorm at Cortland and just throwing the ball against the wall. And my senior advisor for the dormitory was a guy named Barry Davidson, who was a first team All-American, and it was a high school All-American at Massapequa High School. And then he came up to Cortland, and he was a great player. So he took me under his wing, and I learned a great deal about lacrosse from him.
Tony, you played soccer as well, right?
Yes.
Does that help in the development of a young Tony Seaman to be a lacrosse player?
I think so. I think the relationship of the game on the field and up and down, riding and clearing, I mean, that's soccer. That's 100% of soccer is riding and clearing. And so that all kind of made sense to me. And, I was always wanted to be a coach. I always thought I was going to be a basketball coach. But so games were always really important to me. Played all three sports in high school, not lacrosse, but baseball. But and played a lot of basketball. I thought I was going to be a basketball coach, but I started off at Lynbrook High School in Long Island, and I was coaching lacrosse there. And the chance came, instead of moving up from the junior high level, to become the head coach at Lynbrook on the lacrosse. And at the same year, I got the offer from Sewanica High School to become the head basketball coach, and kind of my dream. And I said, man, I got to change schools. I got to get tenure again. I got to go through. I'll stay here and be the lacrosse coach. So that's what I based my decision on.
Soccer was not exactly a Main Street sport in the early 60s. How did soccer come across your landscape?
I played it in junior high in upstate New York at a small school, Washingtonville, New York. And my dad moved us down to Freehold, New Jersey. And for me going out for football at 100 pounds, I would have been laughed at in my freshman year. So I decided to continue my soccer. And I made varsity. In fact, I started for 3 years there. And then my dad did it again to us and moved us up to Delaware Valley in Callicoon, New York. And I went from 1,100 in the high school to 24 in my senior class in my senior year at Callicoon.
Wow. Were you fast?
So I got to play football, though.
Were you fast?
I was quick enough. Yeah.
Okay.
Probably that was my best attribute.
All right. That makes sense. We've had a number of guys from Central New York, and talk a little bit about the Cortland area in Central New York and the way we've had a lot of conversations about one of the reasons they've been so successful at lacrosse, even from the early 60s, is that a lot of guys would come home from school in the summertime, from university and come back and spend time with the, the junior programs. And it was sort of a built-in process that, you were just, that's just the way it was. And so maybe a guy from Syracuse as an All-American takes on 3 or 4 or 5 high school kids, or maybe even junior high kids, to have that opportunity. And there was a very unique understanding of the way you gave back to your community. Did you find that as well?
Yeah, that's very true. And it was always kind of known that Long Island was the key of New York with lacrosse, and that's where it was really built up. But boy, that Syracuse area was just as important and just as built up. When you had West Jenny, my teammate at Cortland, who played attack with me, was Mike Messera, who was West Jenny's famous coach for so long.
Right.
And he was the only one on our team who ever played lacrosse. He came out of West Jenny and played lacrosse. He comes to Cortland, and he probably coached us more than anybody did.
Out of Cortland with a history major and a phys ed degree, you obviously want to be a teacher and a coach, as you mentioned. Did you see yourself beyond high school at that point early in your life? Or was it just always was coaching what a career? Let me ask you a better question. Was coaching a full-time endeavor, or did you enjoy the classroom, or did you really want to move out of the classroom into a full-time coaching position?
I think for 11, 12 years, it was very happy in the classroom. I loved being the center of attention. I loved being in charge. That was great. I liked the history that I taught. And I liked the kids, and I was coaching basketball, I was coaching lacrosse, and I was coaching soccer. So I was very, very happy. And then I got that little bug in my ear to say, I ought to try this at the college level. And I had a guy named John Cannella, who was our assistant principal at the high school, whose sons all played for me. And he would keep saying, you ought to go to college. You're wasting, you love it. You're good at it. Why don't you look at a college job? So then I started sending out applications and information stuff, and never got a bite at all. And all of a sudden, the job opened up at Post, and it was only part-time. And I went over there for an interview, and they called me in, and as the door opened, and the guy leaving who had just been interviewed was John Danowski, who was just graduated from high school, or from college, I'm sorry.
Yep.
And so I said, John, how you doing? He says, good. I said, look, if by any chance I got this job, I'd love you to be my assistant coach. And he said, yeah, I'd be interested in that. Let me know. So I went in, and they offered me the job, and I offered John the job, and he was going to grad school at Columbia at that time. And so he became my assistant, along with a couple of guys who had just graduated from Post. So I was there 1 year. I was still teaching at the high school level, and the Penn job opened up. So I said, what the hell? I got lucky once, but who knows? So I sent an application in there, and the guy who interviewed me, or was the assistant AD, was a basketball player that I had coached against in junior high at Roslyn.
Okay.
And a great basketball player at Penn, and then he became the assistant AD. But they had me down for the interview. Things went well, and all of a sudden I went from $65,000 a year history teacher to a $25,000 a year lacrosse coach at the University of Pennsylvania. Newly married, my wife looking at me like I was out of my mind. What are we doing? We're cutting our salary in half, and this is what you want. So she moved with me.
We had interviewed John earlier in this third season, and he was telling me that, like $4,000 as an assistant that first year, which, fortunately he had a wife that, worked and was fortunate enough to help out. And obviously you can't be a coach at the level working your way up. There's a story about Tom Izzo living in Judd Heathcote's basement for 6 years because he wanted it to be so bad. And so sometimes success is also attrition, because everybody else drops from the wayside, because everybody goes other jobs. And I think that's, so you got to obviously thank that wife that connected us on this interview, certainly I'm sure you thank her every day for the commitment she's made to your career. Oh,
it's been unbelievable. Yeah. And to raise kids and not know when, especially at the college level, it used to be pretty secure, but then as the times changed and winning and losing became more important than anything else. And you never know if you really had a job the next year or not. And you get a new AD, you get a new president of the college, you might as well call somebody, because you're probably going to be looking.
Tony, CW Post was a Division III school. Am I correct?
When I got interviewed and
Yeah.
when I got the job, they told me we're going Division I.
Okay.
So my first year there, the only year there, we went Division I.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I'm going to ask the question is there were a lot of Division III schools in those days that were, on par with some of the middle to lower Division I schools.
Right.
I think of Denison and Salisbury and some really good schools.
Hobart.
That's kind of changed with some Division II schools coming on board and those kinds of things. But I was wondering where CW Post was. But if you were a Division I school, what league was that team in?
Oh boy, you're asking this old brain now some difficult questions. We were in a league with Montclair and Villanova and us, and it was a makeshift group. Montclair State. I mean, it was some crazy schools in that.
What do you remember about John as an assistant the first year?
He was always late for practice, and he was always late for games because he was at Columbia taking courses and had to come out from the city.
Okay.
And my best ever is we're playing at Delphi. It was a huge game. We were pretty good. We did well that year, and a couple players that were terrific. And we're playing at Delphi, and they went to the nationals or to the playoffs that year, but it was a tied game in the second quarter. And I remember looking across the field going, when the hell's Stanowski going to get here? And I see this guy climbing the fence at Adelphi and jumping over. And it was John. And he come run across. How we doing? I said, well, it's tied. But we lost by a goal, but it was a great game. But that's how I remember John, my best memory.
Can you look at him now and think this isn't the same? You don't see greatness when he's 21. Is that fair?
Well, he is a good player, though. God, he was, and he always was. He always had that mental being about him that was so different from anybody else I had ever met. His vision and looking at things, very little to do with lacrosse, more to do with the human mind and the player's psyche than his ability or teaching him. But he's become a hell of a coach.
Well, he grew up as a quarterback too. I think that's sometimes you go back to soccer, that vision from other sports. Yeah. We talk a lot about two-sport athletes. I'm sure that's something that you talk with your own kids in Florida about, that if you get so, holstered into one sport, you don't get the opportunity to see all that the other sports bring to the table in terms of just, vision and culture and the way things operate. I think that's something to
absolutely. It's the biggest drawback of club lacrosse by far. So.
You had a winning season at CW Post your first year, did you not?
We did. We were pretty good. Yeah. We were very good. We won the league championship and things went well.
Tony, is winning a culture, having better players, or being a hell of a coach, or a combination?
Oh, it's a combination, 100%. And the bottom of the combination is a hell of a coach. You got to have players. If you don't have players, now part of coaching is getting the players or having the players. But that was probably the best learning experience I ever had. If people ask me what made me, if I am a good coach, what made me a good coach was being at a high school level, because you couldn't control that. You had who you had coming up. So you worked hard to get the better athletes to be the lacrosse players. That's what you learned in the high school area. And then when you got to college, then you found out not only be a good coach, but you better be a hell of a recruiter or find somebody on your staff that is an awful good identifier of people's talents, and then be able to coach them once they're there.
Is there a Tony Seaman attack midfielder when you're recruiting kids? Is there a kind of player you look for within your own culture when you were and I say that when you go to Penn, you're talking Ivy League, so you're not talking scholarships. You got to not only sell the school, you got to point out to them it's going to cost them money to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And not very successful when I got there for their history. Never won the Ivy League championship, never been to the playoffs. So we had a ways to go. Great school and great people. And, we were fortunate enough to get it turned around. I did inherit an unbelievable senior class, junior and senior class that was there. Not many of them, but they were really good players. So Charlie Coker had done a great job identifying people and getting them to come there to play. And thank God, between us and my staff, we were able to turn them into pretty successful. We won the Ivy League championship my first year there. And that turned a lot of heads around, I think.
is recruiting for an Ivy League school different than coaching or recruiting for other schools? You get a
Well,
different kid?
I've always asked, the first thing you got to ask is, what are your grades? And what are your scores, GPA scores? But besides that, that's the biggest thing. And then it's, to sell what's the strong point of your university. I mean, certainly the Wharton School at Penn was a huge attraction. Very hard for me to get many players in there. I think the first thing I did was became pretty friendly with the admissions director. And I think that helps. He's your guy. When you're a college coach, if you're not getting along with admissions, then you've got big problems. And that helped me be pretty successful.
So as you're developing when you came through, do you think of yourself as an offensive or a defensive guy? I know what the world thinks of you, but what do you think?
Well, out of my high school background, I had to be everything.
Right.
So, and I always tried to envision what would make my players, and that was based on my high school stuff. We had to change every year. You couldn't be the same guy. You couldn't run the same offense. You couldn't run the same defense in high school. If you did, you weren't very good, and you were successful one year when you had that, and the next 3 years you were horrible. So I learned to be a little bit more versatile and figure that out. So I was at both ends. I think probably the defensive end is kind of where I tried to make the most change or do things differently than everybody else, or thought I was creating things that were a little different. And I guess that's led me. But even now, as a high school coach, I let my offensive guy coach the offense. I let my defensive guy do the defense. But I find myself down at the defensive end more than the offensive end.
Obviously, a great career. You take Penn, Hopkins, and Towson to the NCAAs. But now you had this run at Penn. Obviously, the door in Hopkins opens up. Talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean that was a hard one not to apply for. It was, I mean, back in the 90s, 80s, 90s, beginning of the 2000s, it was a school. It was they won a championship within every 4 years. They were in the limelight. They were on TV. You just knew about them. They were everywhere. And when that, I had gotten to be really, really friendly with Bill Tierney, and it's probably still one of my best friends in lacrosse. And when he turned down the Hopkins job to stay at Princeton, he was good enough to say to Bob Scott, that maybe they should look at the guy at Penn. And I also, I went into my wife and said, "What do you think?" She says, "I think you're crazy. You're happy here at Penn. Things are going good." I said, "Yeah, but Tierney's at Princeton. That scares the hell out of me. We've been pretty good here for 9 years, and I've gotten kind of the good eggs out of the basket. I don't think that's going to happen much longer with him at Princeton. It's just so hard to compete against Princeton." As a Penn guy, Penn guys would probably kill me for saying that, but it was true. And so I said, if this thing opens up, she says, "Well, you're putting yourself on all kind of attention if you do that." We had a good discussion about it, but I talked to Bob Scott and be down, and I got the job, and she was right. It was a tough 8-9 years. It was never good enough unless there was a championship that had been kind of established, and I was never fortunate enough. I was in the playoffs every single year, went to the Final Four times out of my 8 years there, but didn't win it. And had some close ones, had a couple teams, 95 team and the 96 team could have won it for sure, but just didn't go right at the end.
Who did you replace? Who left Hopkins when you came in? Who was before you?
Don Zimmerman.
Yeah, that's what I thought. He went then. Did he not go then to UMBC?
Yeah, he got the job at UMBC the next week, I think.
Are the athletes at Penn similar to the athletes in terms of grades and academics that were in Hopkins?
Oh, you could get a lot more questionable academic people into Hopkins than you ever could at. I think, okay. Although I will say one thing that did change was that Jerry Schneidman, God bless his soul, who just passed away, was the admissions director and had just left the job, and they had hired somebody else, and he moved up to work for the president. And admissions changed a great deal. My first admissions guy at Hopkins sat down with me near the end, and I'm trying to get 4 guys in, and he says to me, what's your ability to get all 4 of those guys in if they're accepted? Will you get them to come here? I said, are you kidding me? Of course they'll come. I just spent, months and months. And so that's what that guys knew about lacrosse and about Hopkins. He really didn't know anything. I went back to Bob Scott and told him about that conversation. And Bob Scott got up, threw his chair against the wall, and was gone. And an hour later, he came back and he went, I gave that young man instructions about Hopkins and admissions and what goes on here. So that was a shock. And so that was kind of a different thing that I went through that I think a lot of guys before me never went through at Hopkins.
We used to visit USL headquarters that were next door to Homewood Field right there. They had their office, in that same parking lot. So I used to look at Homewood Field, and I've said this a couple of times on the show. We looked at Homewood Field like Yankee Stadium. And what occurs to me to ask this question was athletics, and more importantly, lacrosse in the Hopkins world looked at as maybe football was at Alabama, or basketball at Michigan State? Was athletics just something you did for fun at an academic school like that?
No, it was 100%. Same persona as in Alabama. Okay. Or a Duke basketball. Yes. Huge.
Okay. Yeah. Because you'd always have big crowds and,
Oh, yeah.
Because I still think, you think of Homewood as the Yankee Stadium to some extent. I think it's certainly one of the, landmark places where if kids want to go play. I think that's an important point in even recruiting for that school.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So from Hopkins back out to Baltimore, back out to Towson, correct?
Yeah. I think it was about 11 days later. Thank God. Coach Runk left Towson and had been there for so long, and the job opened up, and I got a call, and we met in a secret room in some hotel with the athletic director. And the next day I met the president and was hired. So that was very fortunate for me.
How long were you at Towson?
13 years.
Okay. That was your longest place, right? Longest stint?
Yes. Yep. And even there, we got a new athletic director, and he thought maybe I was too old for the job, and things weren't going as well as they should have been in the final year. So maybe I ought to step down with grace and dignity and say that I was retiring. But that, I think, were his words.
Tony, talk about age in terms of employment, because you're coaching at the high school level. Tony, you're what, 75, 76?
79.
79.
Real close to 80.
Did you still think you'd be coaching when you were 50 at 79?
I never thought about when it would end. That's
why?
The truth. Yeah. So
why?
I never felt like I was old. I never felt like, I've never felt old. I'm surprised. That's, I guess, why I hate looking in the mirror in the morning. And I realize I am old, or trying to get out of bed in the morning. But the damn kids, they keep you so young, and you just stay involved. And it's God bless. I have no idea why, but physically I've been pretty healthy, and internally I've been very healthy. I'm not even sure if I have a full-time doctor that I see. So, and I put it all on that. I love going to work every day, and I love seeing those kids, and they drive me crazy sometimes, but it keeps me young.
I asked the question of Bill. Attorney Bill was part of our town hall early part of the season, and Bill's been very fortunate. Bill's been on a couple of times. Bill said, I coach because I love it, and why should I stop doing something I love? And I thought that's such a simple answer, but it kind of sums up everything.
Yeah.
And
so
I don't think that, I think there's a certain amount of ageism in every sport in terms of coaches, because they look at you and figure that, you're ready to retire. I had an athletic director call me this year to help him out to sort of work through a list of coaches. Then he asked me if I'd like the job, and I said, well, I'll talk to you about it. He called me back and says I wasn't qualified. So I was like, I said, I'm Hall of Fame and all the rest of the stuff, but I'm not qualified. They hire a 25-year-old kid. The kid's already, we're 2 weeks into the season. They fired him 10 days into the season. So there's those things that happen, and I get those things. But what does age give you now, looking at your assistants who are obviously trying to learn from you? Obviously the mentoring and the experience, but is mentoring for you a very specific thing, very specific aspect that you work at, or does it just come naturally? Is it something you think about when you put your practice plans together? Or is it just sort of the way you are?
Yeah, I kind of think it's the way I am, number one, but I certainly go into every practice and every game with a mindset in the last 4 or 5 years that they're running their end, and I'll listen to their huddle. We'll always divide defense and offense, and I'll listen to what they want to do, or I'll say to the defensive coach, you know what, I think we should switch over to man now, or we should play the zone now, or we should move this kid there. I go to the offensive guy and go, man, I'm not sure I like that. You've run that a lot and it hasn't gotten us anywhere, and it's near the end of the game. Why don't we throw this in or whatever in those aspects? But I try to give them more and more. My idea of taking the job at St. Andrews was that I'm going to mentor a couple guys and help them be better coaches and be head coaches. And I'll be out of here in 2 years. And this is my 8th year. So, I'm still there.
Tony, do you intellectually think about mentoring your coaches the way you might develop a player?
It's more absolutely hands-on, do it this way with the player. But and I think it's more of, why'd you do that? What would have you changed? Or after games are over, or right after a timeout, what you're thinking there? Or he'll come up and say, I think we should do this. And I have to be very careful of going, no, we're not doing that. Why do you want to do that? And that kind of, so I've tried to do that more in the since I've been at St. Andrews.
Would your assistants call you a micromanager, or you let them coach?
Oh, they'll tell you that I let them coach.
Okay.
Yeah. Because
you can still learn from them, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. 100%. I've got 3 guys that work for me that are the 3 most positive human beings I've ever met in my life. They have taught me more about being a positive guy instead of a negative guy.
Right.
I was always half empty glass. I mean, I never saw it the right way. I've never had an official yet who was any good ever, and or a call that was really the right call. I've never seen one. I just played yesterday and it was a folly, but anyway, they're amazing. And so that's taught me a lot and opened up my eyes. So yeah, you learn every day.
I asked that because being open-minded, as in again, fourth quarter of the process, if you're not open-minded, you find yourself maybe a little bit blind to the process, right? You may mention you've never seen a call that you like. Have you ever actually had to officiate games of any kind in any sport?
Yeah.
Okay.
Not official, not being an official, but ref my own practices and stuff, and get yelled at by the kids all the time on what a lousy job I'm doing. Hardest job in the world.
From a long-term official, both at the collegiate and high school level, as well as being a coach, every coach should have to officiate, because I think they would find the glasses that they're looking through would be slightly different than what they think.
Yes.
I don't think
there's no doubt.
Nobody comes out to cheat kids for $45 a game. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. And you're so right. You're so right. And I tell myself this all the time. And I get a lecture every day from the woman I live with. And my own son's like, hey, Dad, what the hell's wrong with you? But man, I only see it one way. I try to change it. I promise myself that I'm going to see it differently. But
I want to touch briefly on the PLL in Denver and some stuff, but both your son and your son played at Princeton.
Yes.
And was a good player. And your daughter played, I'm not sure where she played.
University of Pennsylvania.
Okay. She went and played at Penn. My son played for me, and actually my son played for Jamie at Denver. My question is, take the coach hat off. One of the questions I asked John Danowski when he went from Hofstra to Duke, I asked him if he was going as the father of his son who had gone through this terrible ordeal, or was he going down because he wanted a new opportunity to coach. And he mentioned to us that he never mentioned anybody before. His wife didn't come down for the first 18 months. She stayed home because she wasn't sure after all the debacle. My question is, did you coach your kids in high school or college? Well, obviously not college, but how are you as a dad as well as being the infamous coach?
When they asked her, my daughter, I think I worked with more than my son, and different aspects of the game. And they were both really good 3-sport athletes.
Okay.
And they were drawn into, Greg made every bus trip we ever took at Hopkins and at Towson. And he was, part of lacrosse. And my daughter came to practices a lot, and they were just both kids. So I was in that process, and I died for them. I suffered through every damn sport they played, and so many times. And my wife would go, "Shut up, just get back there," And I'll never forget watching him when he was like 8 years old, and he's playing in the Towson Rec League, and I'm sitting up on a hill trying to stay away from everything. And this woman comes by. I was at Hopkins then, and she goes, "Oh, do you have a son playing?" And I went, "Yeah, he's down there." She says, "You're the coach. They love to have people help out and everything. Do you know anything about lacrosse?" I said, "No, I like it up here on the hill. Thank you." But, it's so hard. And then my daughter went to Penn, and she was a hell of a high school athlete. And I thought she was going to be a basketball player. She's almost 6 foot, and she was really good and started for 4 years, but she loved lacrosse. And so she went to Penn and played lacrosse at Penn and didn't get off the bench in her freshman year. And I couldn't understand it. And boy, I wanted to reach for that phone. I can't tell you how many times, and have a serious talk with that coach. And my wife would just go, "You want that phone call coming to you?" And I'd go, you're right, and put it back down. So that was a very hard learning lesson for me. And so I think I became more understanding of parents through both of them than I ever had been. And I think I'm still that way. That's a better quality that I've developed as a coach, is realizing how hard it is on parents.
Tony, did they get their athletic talent from you or your wife?
Probably my wife. They got their brains from my wife. I know that. There's not even a question there.
All right. So Towson, you're set, then you get the chance to be back involved in the MLL. Talk a little bit about going to Denver.
That was the best thing I ever did. The most enjoyable part of coaching that I've ever had. Just working with all those guys. The only reason they were there was because they wanted to be there. They're giving up every weekend. They're giving up all their relationships just to get out there and play, because they loved the game and they were very good at the game. And so the key there was to put them together and decide who got playing time and who didn't, or who made. That whole thing was based on who you brought in, your draft, and who you put together and how you put them together. But I just, first of all, it was a first-class run organization. It was the Outlaws were owned by the Denver Broncos, and the guy most responsible, besides Pat Bowden, who is the owner of the Broncos and really liked lacrosse, was the general manager. One of the general managers of, not the general manager, I'm trying to think of what his real title was. But he was so good and included everything and loved it. He's the guy who played lacrosse and wanted the pro league to be part of Denver. And so I came in at a great time. They'd been going for about 8 years and had never won a championship. And so they made me the general manager. That's how I started off. And I brought Jimmy Stagnita in as got rid of some people and brought some people in, had a couple of good draft years. And it took us to the third year. I think we started at 12. And then he left me in 2014 to take another job. And BJ O'Hara I had also brought in as an assistant coach, because his experience in the MLL and his success there had been unbelievable. So it was easy to move him up and become the head coach. And we won in 14, and we won in 16, and we won in 18. So that, and then in 14, when we won, we had another guy that was going to be the assistant, but he couldn't get out of his commitment. So I became the assistant. So I just worked with BJ until he left us. So that was just great. The whole thing. I could talk for hours and hours.
By the time you got to Denver, Denver was already a hotbed of lacrosse.
Yes.
And if you look at the indoor, if you look at the NLL team, Steve Gouvert, who's now with San Diego Seals, it had been a really good lacrosse town. They were very successful on the indoor game. They would sell out, on a pretty regular basis.
Absolutely.
Obviously the outdoor league, took off. The MLL had, as the longer you were there, the better it was. Everybody keeps looking at Denver as, sort of this hotbed that just sort of developed, but it had been developing for a while. And I think, can you contribute some of that to maybe Jamie going from Brown out to Denver as part of that discussion?
Yes, 100%. Jamie's story there is very twofold, but he was very successful at getting, I think, the ground roots started and a lot of people involved, and then had some success with the varsity at Denver, and did a great job and got it. And Jamie always reaches out. He's got those grassroots that go everywhere and pushes everything. So I think did a lot to develop it. And then God comes in. I mean, who comes in? It's better than Tierney with his reputation, his knowledge, and his ability. And what's he do? He wins. And then all of a sudden he wins a national championship. I mean, unheard of. Who the hell would ever thought of that after their past record? And that whole city just became ignited. And you got so many young people that live there, and it flourishes. And you got so many transient people that live there. So I think a lot of lacrosse came to Denver from other areas, and people involved with it, guys our age, and became really interested in promoting it. And so it was the perfect cycle from Jamie to Tierney to success.
A friend of mine named Bill Wolford, who passed recently, but Bill was part of the Chicago, was part of that. Billy, I'm sure you've met Billy more than once.
Yes.
Billy and I were real close and been friends for a long time. But one of the questions I asked Billy, who I still think is the smartest lacrosse guy I ever met, but at any rate, I asked Billy, I said, when you're coaching high school kids and all of a sudden you go to that Friday night, you go to a pro practice. So you're coaching college kids, and all of a sudden, John Grant Jr. is one of your, it's one of your players. There's obviously a skill level difference. What do you as a coach? What did you as a coach do? Did you just do your job, or is there an adjustment for you going to that level, having those kinds of players?
I think it's asking those players what makes you most successful, and what makes you better on the field every game, and what can we do to put you in the spot that you flourish in. I asked John Grant. I had the pleasure of coaching him, and then I had the pleasure of hiring him as an assistant coach. So right. I've gotten to know John really, really well. But I'll never forget one day early on that we were there. We were talking about some of the things that he wanted to do with our offense, that he would like to see do with our offense. And I said, just talking about it, I said, you think what's your really keys? His deception. It's making them think where I'm going to shoot and it's not where I'm going to shoot, and my ability to put it exactly where I want to. And I said, well, how accurate do you really think you are? And we're about 19, 20 yards from the goal. And I said, well, can you hit that left pipe going up and down? Can you hit that? How many times in 20? He goes 16, 17. Get out of here. He did it 19 out of 20. And throwing the ball pretty hard too. And I went, okay, I'll never ask you again, but
right.
That's accuracy. So, and skill level, but yeah, all those things, I think they're huge. So even defensively, what do you guys, where do you feel your strengths are? Do you want to switch or not switch? Are matchups that important at this level? So I think the more you got them involved at the pro level, they really felt they were part of it, and they really bought into it. And we had great locker rooms because of that. I think in the pro level, the locker room is 100% the most important thing, how they all get along. Because I had the world team in 1994, and there was guys who didn't throw the ball to other guys, and and those kind of things, you have to address that right away. And it's apparent when you got guys that can play at that level. So that becomes a really big thing. And you just got to trade people or get rid of people because of that. It might be great players.
we're in the midst of interviewing some of the Hall of Fame, the PLL Hall of Fame guys. We've had Mark Millen on, Paul Candabini, we've got J.J. Bear coming up, and then we're trying to get some other guys. You've been one of the few that have said that my terms, traveling circus, the PLL is going from town to town to town. And I've had conversations with a number of the PLL guys, including Jim Stagnata, one of your former assistants. And I think they've got to go back to a city model where you have I can remember that, you and I are old enough to remember, I'm sure there was a team that you could remember. I can remember the 68 Tigers because that's who I grew up with, right? In Detroit. And my point is the familiarity translates sometimes to ticket sales. And
100%.
And if you don't know the name, or if you're not really sure of the name, how do you get, enthused? And if you look at the PLL championship last year, they had a 20,000 seat stadium. They sold 12,000 tickets.
Right.
The reality is, if it's the best game in town, contracts with ESPN and NBC are only based on dollars. They're not necessarily based on whether you can shoot fast or you're a good guy. My question is, talk briefly about that and your thoughts, and just the PLL. You think eventually they settle down? And then the follow-up, Tony, question is it now great to have the MLL and the NLL in different seasons? A couple of weeks overlap, I understand that. But now you can be a professional lacrosse player, which is probably not true most of your career.
That's true. That's true. We always had the problem of the indoor guy and how could we get him for the early part of the season, as opposed just to the last 3 or 4 games. So that was the thing. 100%, the city venue is more important than anything else. You got to have the hometown. You got to have the fans behind you. I mean, we sell between 4,000 and 5,000 season tickets before our season ever started at Denver. And I know in Major League Baseball and stuff, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's a lot. And to sell that out preseason, amazing. So you get that interest, and the kids love it, and they know who the players are, and it's identified with. Now, and I think that's where the PLL has to go to really get the success that they want. I mean, they've got no opposition now. There's no other leagues, so they can do pretty much what they want. But I think for the Rebels, that would be a huge key, is getting city location and putting your teams in home bases. And that I always thought, even back, I remember I went to the first meeting MLL ever had, just as a college coach in Baltimore. And at that time they were at Hopkins and thinking about moving over to Navy as their home base. And United States Eastern Coast League, and you ought to draw from every city that is on the ocean, so that you start off in Maine and have a Cape Cod team, and then move your way down to Long Island, and then all the way down to Florida. Right. And run your games at 8 o'clock, 7:30 at night, because nobody has anything at the beach. Once you're home at 4 o'clock, you get showered, you have dinner. There's nothing to do until 10 or 11 to go out. You never go out until later. So boy, you'd fill an unbelievable space. You'd have the problem is in the summer is a lot of people go away for vacations. Where do they go? They go to the beach. So you would have people in all those locations that know of lacrosse, came from major cities that lacrosse was popular, and do it that way. I wasn't listened to, but I always thought that would really work.
No, I asked the question. You've seen these sailboats that are on foils that are going so fast called Sail GP, and they have 8 events around the world. And the only place they went forever was San Francisco. So next year they're coming to Chicago. Actually, this coming summer they're coming to Chicago, and they were told that they could do really well there, and they just kept balking. It turns out that they've already opened ticket sales for the Chicago event in June, and it's the first time they've ever sold out an event. Wow. And all of a sudden now Chicago maybe becomes a staple on the process, because they've sold more tickets in Chicago than they did for the other 7 venues. Right. It's a novelty. Everybody wants to go see it. It's kind of the point of getting back to the premise. But right. They obviously have great lacrosse, and it's fun watching them. But
they got to find a way, and you can't. Who do you root for? So I go watch this guy because I know about him from college, and I go root. By end of the third quarter, I really don't have a team that I'm rooting for.
Tony?
They're not staying, and they don't come back.
Right.
So that's the problem.
Well, listen, you're at St. Andrews, which is at Boca. You've won a state championship already. So, Tony, I don't think you've ever had a program where you didn't win. Have you ever had eventually you've won wherever you've been. So my question is, that a factor of knowledge, luck, or just hard work?
All three.
Okay.
100% all three.
Okay.
Hard work always, if you don't have fast horses, you don't win damn races. You just don't. So you better have players. And if you don't have players at the high school level right away, then you better develop them, and you better find a way to coach them and make them better, or bring it together as a team. So, and it goes all the way through.
Tony, we've done about 60 interviews with some of the best guys in the country. We've had, Bill Tierney, and this year alone, we've had Seth Tierney, John Danowski, Dave Cobb. I mean, some serious guys, including yourself. Your name comes up more than anybody's. And I asked the question because I'm curious. Do you recognize the coaching tree you've left behind? But more important, does it dawn on you the legacy that you have going, or is it just something that you just go to work every day?
Just go to work every day.
Okay.
Try to remember the kids. That probably my biggest thing is who I've coached and how they're doing, and who I coached with. I always felt it was a big role of mine as a head coach to make sure my assistant coaches developed and then got good jobs and moved on to places. So it's funny because all those guys, I've been a part of their lives, and they've been a part of mine, and from the Stagnitas in the world. But I was coaching, I was counting the other day, and I think I've had 13 or 14 now head coaches in the NCAA that at one time or another worked for me or worked with me. So I've been very fortunate. It's been a great life. It's still the best sport that I've ever been around, with people. Very, very few that I've ever met that I don't like or have not been impressed with. Some of the best minds, and everybody had to be a hard worker, because it was never a sport that, it's always been developing, and it's always had its barriers, and it always gets sidelined. My season down here will be over on May 7th, because that's the state championships, but we're not allowed to play on May 8th because spring football starts.
Right.
But that's Florida. That's like nowhere else in the world. You have spring football that no other sport can function because it's spring football.
California shares that with you.
Yeah. No, there you go.
It's crazy.
It's amazing. And then, boy, you talk about good teams. And Dallas now. What I've tried to do at St. Andrews is have every year I bring in 3 or 4 teams from outside, from really, like Boys Latin was down this year, and Dallas Jesuit. You want to talk about a good lacrosse team? Oh my God, were they good? They were more impressive than Boys Latin. Try to do that just so the parents here can understand why sometimes their kids don't get recruited like they think they should be recruited, or maybe that spending $50,000 for a club program in the summer might not be worthwhile. Maybe you should put that money in the bank and let the investment grow and pay for his college education. But there's just so many things out there that we try to let these kids see and find out that, man, there's so many good players everywhere.
Talk briefly of Florida in terms of the high school world. Is it because a lot of northern coaches have moved south, or is it because the sports developed because of clinics and everything else?
Yeah, I think both. Club, certainly because a lot of good coaches have come south and are here. Just in my area, we got Stan Ross, who was fantastic at Navy and several other schools, and was an assistant for me at Towson. He's done a great job down here. There's so many I could just throw out names of people who are here now coaching and making the sport grow here. And it's a great game. So once kids play it, despite what baseball players or baseball coaches tell them, they play it and it's like, man, this is fun. This is pretty cool. And you get more and more players playing it. I guess about 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I believe there was 9 or 10 teams that played in Florida, the high school teams. There's over 298 now. So it's really grown and it's huge, and it's well looked at. So it's developing.
We have an issue in Michigan. We call it a young sport. Although everybody calls it a young sport, we've been playing for 52 years.
Yeah.
Well, part of the development has to be more than, the carpetbaggers on the travel programs taking out of it. But, it's funny. Yesterday I stood on the sidelines of the Michigan Maryland game, And as they're announcing the 20 kids starting, there were 3, maybe 4 kids from Maryland or Michigan out of the 20 starters, which meant that 3/4 of those kids came from some other state.
Yeah.
So it really has become the point I'm trying to make, I guess, is that it has become much more of a national sport, especially at that level. And watching the guys play at that level was certainly fun. I need to leave you with one quick story, and it's a local story. And I told you before we started, Chris Cullen, who's the University of Detroit head coach, was at Birmingham Seaholm at the time and wanted really to play Division I lacrosse. He went to a camp at Country Day in which you were involved. He apparently talked to you about going to Hopkins when you were at Hopkins, and you told him flat out that he wasn't good enough. But you took his phone number, you put it in his pocket, apparently put it in your pocket, and he got calls from several other schools within the next few weeks. And he ended up at Rutgers and playing and getting his degree and ending up as a Division I coach. Tony, you have touched a lot of lives directly, but sometimes I wonder if people recognize how many lives you touch indirectly. And if that's the only story I knew about you, it would be, like the best story possible. And I think that's something that I want our audience to know. And I just thought that was just a great story. And just for what it's worth.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And that certainly makes this whole show worthwhile, a story like that. So, and thanks for having me on. And I think you do a great job to, promote the sport and develop the sport and let guys like me have something to watch every weekend. And I love your interviews and your questions that you ask people are poignant and right on. And we need more of it. So
Tony,
thank you for all you do.
I appreciate your time, Tony, and have a great rest of the season. And hopefully it doesn't get too warm down there this summer for you.
No, it's beautiful. I should have done this 60 years ago. We'll see you soon.
I just wanted to thank Tony and all the guys at the University of Michigan for allowing us to come to the game, and certainly Tony for sitting down and interviewing with us. Just a great 50 minutes that I'll never forget. One of the best ever. We hope you enjoyed the show. For all the guys in back, this is Greg Norman for Michigan Lacrosse Review. We'll see you next time.